Hey everybody, it's Ed. Real quick before we start, I want to thank two brand new podcast supporters, Jason Renfro and Zach Millimet. Both Jason and Zach went to mountainandprairie.com/support, and they chose to support the podcast on a monthly basis through Patreon. There are a lot of different benefits that come with that, but if you want to learn how all of it works, go to mountainandprairie.com/support. But again, I really appreciate both Zach and Jason, as well as the hundreds of other people who have chosen to support the podcast over the years. It really means a lot. Hey, this is Ed Roberson, and this is the Mountain and Prairie podcast, where I introduce you to some of the innovative individuals who are shaping the future of the American West. I meet most of these people through my work in land conservation or through my hobbies and interests that revolve around spending time up high in the mountains. My guests include ranchers, writers, entrepreneurs, conservationists, athletes, artists, adventurers, pretty much anyone who's doing important work, has an interesting story, and loves the American West. My guest today is Nickolas Butler. Nickolas is an award-winning writer and novelist who's published 5 books, one of which is the wildly popular, award-winning Shotgun Love Songs. His most recent novel is titled Godspeed, and it's a fast-paced thriller of a book that was set in and around Jackson Hole, Wyoming. While the novel has all the components that make for a great story, action, suspense, wild landscapes, complex characters, it also touches on many of the challenges facing the modern-day West, including income inequality and rural gentrification. From the first page of Godspeed, I was hooked, and I stayed up way too late for several nights in a row finishing the book. For all of Nick's accomplishments as a novelist, his path to becoming a full-time writer was not an easy one, nor was he an overnight success. He spent many years working a variety of jobs, including as a telemarketer, a meatpacker, and as a Burger King maintenance man. And as you'll hear him discuss in this conversation, it was during his stint working as a liquor store clerk that he finally made the decision to fully commit to the craft and profession of writing. Fast forward to today, and his focus, commitment, and hard work have paid off. Not only is he a successful full-time writer, but he's also a devoted husband and father of 2. Nick and I recorded this conversation just a few days after the publication of Godspeed. I was lucky enough to read an advance copy of the book prior to our conversation, and I really can't say enough great things about it. So we obviously talked a lot about the book, his process for writing it, how the book highlights present-day challenges facing the West, and how he went about developing the plot and the characters. We also discussed his journey as a writer and as an artist. We talked about how and why he views writing as a craft, the importance of hard work, and how he keeps his competitive fire burning even after experiencing so much success. We talked a lot about family and community, which are 2 subjects that Nick and I are both very passionate about. And finally, Nick offers up a ton of excellent book and author recommendations, as well as some wise parting words. Big thanks to the great writer, angler, and past podcast guest Chris Dombrowski for introducing me to Nick. Check out the episode notes for links to everything we discuss and for links to all the books and authors that Nick mentions. And I definitely encourage you to pick up a copy of Godspeed. I can guarantee you won't be disappointed. Thanks a lot. Hope you enjoy. As we had talked about on the phone, you describe yourself as being mid-career in the writing business. This is your 5th book. And I was wondering if you could compare the release of this 5th book, Godspeed, with how you felt on the release of your very first novel. Like how has that evolution changed? Because I would imagine they're both pretty nerve-wracking in some ways, but maybe less so. Could you kind of describe how this week has been for you?
First off, it's nice to talk to you, and I'm thankful for my friend Chris Dombrowski for introducing the 2 of us.
Oh, same here.
My first book sold in 2012, months after I graduated from the Iowa Writers Workshop, and it sold in one of the kind of biggest literary auctions of that year. And then days in the preceding hours and days after that initial auction, it sold in, I think, 12 foreign countries, and the movie rights were snatched up by Fox Searchlight, and it was dizzying. Because I remember having a conversation with one of my best friends, the novelist Marcus Burke, in the days before all that happened. And he said, like, what do you think is going to happen with this? And I said, I don't know, man. Honestly, it could sell for $5,000 or it could sell for $500,000. And I don't know what the answer is. And when all that happened, it was sort of like, I tell people, like waking up into your dream. Yeah. My dream since I was a teenager was to be a writer. So to suddenly have this affirmation and, financial affirmation and critical affirmation, I really suffered from like an imposter syndrome for a while. I had a hard time sort of even dealing with it. I got off social media, like right as I should have been jacking myself up on social media, really like promoting an audience. I just dropped off the face of the earth, and that sort of madness, I guess positive madness, continued into 2014 when the book was published. And I mean, the very first hotel I stayed in was the Beverly Hills. It's where Pretty Woman was filmed. I'm blanking on it, but I mean, like just a beautiful hotel. And I was there for 3 days, being wined and dined by folks in Hollywood. And then I would say about 5 months later, I was promoting the book, and I was at like a Motel 8 in northern Michigan, and I thought, oh, maybe the sales aren't everything everybody wanted, and now 5 books into the thing, I think I have a totally different mentality about it. I mean, I think I look at my job as a craft. One of my best friends is a wooden boat builder up on Lake Superior, and we have taught craft all the time and meaning and purpose. And so it is different. I'm not the new thing anymore. And you have to find a different way to sort of push yourself as an artist. But I'm super grateful for the readership that I have and my friends in the literary community. And to me, it's not really about being here as a 41-year-old guy 5 books into the thing. It's like, well, where am I going to be when I'm 60? So.
And so when you said you kind of backed off and you kind of decided to get off, scale back on social media and all that, like, what was it just that people, like if you typed your name in the internet, there was a lot of stuff came up, like you knew people were discussing you and you just didn't want to be part of it? Or was it just, I mean, like what was and how old were you then? It's like maybe 33 at that point?
Yeah, I guess I was, I think I was 32, 33. It was the fall of that year. So, and that's when my birthday is. But yeah, I could get on the internet and I could read narratives that I didn't really feel like were accurate. I could see the way the first book was being marketed, which wasn't necessarily like exactly how I would have wanted that narrative written.
Yep.
And it was just too much, I just wanted to be a writer, but I didn't really know, I didn't sign up for like all the other stuff, which now in hindsight, I realized like maybe I should have done things differently, or maybe I should have talked to somebody. Maybe that would have been helpful. I don't know. Yeah, I think I just felt like I had no control over anything, and it was all just too much.
No, that's understandable. I mean, I can't imagine it. I can't imagine that it'd just be the strangest feeling, because it'd be one thing, it would still be a lot, but it'd be one thing if it was kind of this, like if to get to that point, it took you, like say you were at that point on book number 5 after grinding for, through the publishing business for 10 years. But the fact that it kind of started out like that, I would just imagine it's like vertigo. I mean, I don't, so now 5 books in, how do you deal with reviews? Like when people, because I think reviews are the weirdest thing and they don't make any sense to me and I don't understand. And I look at, like, for this podcast, I'll every now and then look at iTunes reviews. I don't know why I do it, but because it doesn't, like, I always think about the band Coldplay. Like, I don't like Coldplay. I don't like it. If I listen to it, if they come on, I turn it off instantly. That doesn't mean they're not badass musicians. They're like unbelievably creative. They've made hundreds of millions of dollars. Like they're doing something right to somebody, but it's not for me. And that's not an insult, but I'm not, who am I to say Coldplay sucks? And so and that's what I think about reviews in general. I mean, so how do you process that when people are sizing up your work after the fact?
Well, I think early on in the process, early on in putting out a book, I look at the reviews a little bit and then I stop.
Yeah.
And I don't read comment sections anymore. You know, it's nice to get a good review, but I don't take those to heart very much either. And I'll tell you something, like I live in my hometown of Eau Claire, Wisconsin. Mm-hmm. I'm married to my high school sweetheart, who I've known since I was about 16. My family is really important to me. My in-laws are important to me. Many of my closest friends are guys I've known since I was a little boy. And none of them take those reviews seriously, whether they're good or bad. That's been really healthy for me. Nobody puffs me up.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I'm just a guy, and I'm just like, and this happens to be my job, and it's not even the most important job that I have. I mean, you and I were talking a little bit about, you know, your kids and how you couldn't even imagine what your life was like before them, you know? And I had a great teacher at the Iowa Writers Workshop, a guy named James Allen McPherson, who, I believe he was the first black man to graduate from the Harvard Law School. He won the Pulitzer Prize. He won a MacArthur Genius Fellow.
Damn.
He used to party with Richard Pryor and like he was a celebrity. But over time, his literary light or mojo or whatever sort of began to decline. And he used to tell us, like, the Pulitzer Prize ain't going to visit you in the nursing home. And he would always ask about my family first. He never, you know, he was interested in my stories and stuff, but mostly he was trying to figure out, like, why I was spending 10 hours of my week on highways driving from north of Minneapolis, Minnesota down to Iowa City, and how was my wife handling that, and how was my, you know, baby son, and that was just a great lesson for me in you know, trying to maintain some sort of grace and humility, and keeping your eyes on, you know, what the real priorities in life are, which to me are being like a dad and a husband and son, brother, friend.
Yeah, no, I think that makes perfect sense. And I think it fits in well with what you said earlier about you have a craftsman's approach to writing. And I feel like I've been lucky enough to get to know a lot of super talented writers through this podcast. And I think that's kind of a common theme among most of them, is like it's almost like the finished product doesn't even really matter all that much. I mean, it's just like this like Peter Heller, for example. I mean, he writes 1,000 words every day. And then he finishes, he goes fishing for 3 days, and then he starts writing 1,000 words a day on the next one. And it's just, it's almost like the end only means I get to go fishing. I mean, you know, and I think that just being obsessed with the process, obviously I don't personally know anything about it, but from all these cool people I've talked to, that, and they're all humble too. Like they're like you, they're good people who that's their job. And, can you talk a little bit about that? About, obviously you're an artist and you're obsessed with art and you create art, but it is your job. It's not like you I wouldn't imagine you sit around waiting to be inspired or just kind of hoping that things work out. So can you talk about kind of that balance of creating art versus cranking things out like a workman?
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, look, I don't have another job. I mean, some writers are also professors or whatever it is. I don't work in academia. I've been fortunate the past 10 years to make a good living, even at times a great living off writing. So that means that I got to write a book about every 2 years. And there's a writer who lives in my neck of the woods named Michael Perry, really cool guy. And he says his muse is the banker. And that's not very romantic, but it's really true.
Yeah.
You know, I can relate to that a lot. And my wife works really hard, man. She's like, she works for a wealth management firm, and she's sort of their in-house legal mind. And she puts in long, hard days. And so for me, thinking that I didn't work very hard makes me feel terrible.
Yeah.
We're a partnership, and I'm part of that. So, and as for like creativity or, coming up with new ideas, I'm always listening to people. One cool thing about my job is that even if a person doesn't read, I think that they have kind of a respect for writers as storytellers still within our culture, and they will tell me the important stories of their life. And so then it's my job to just be there listening. And it doesn't mean that their stories are always as good as they imagine. Oftentimes that's true. They're not as good as they imagine. But sometimes somebody will tell you an amazing story, sort of like the story that kickstarted Godspeed. And you just sit back and think like, this person brought me a present, and I need to think about how to use that. And in a way honor what they've done. They're trying to tell me something important about their life.
No, I think that's super cool. And that's a perfect way to start talking about Godspeed, because I said I wouldn't be too much of a super fan when we're doing the interview, but I'm just going to say I absolutely love the book. And people who listen to this podcast know that I generally have a hard time keeping going with fiction or novels. And I actually, when I was reading one of the reviews, recently somebody had put in one of the iTunes reviews that they wanted to start a drinking game where every time I said I have a hard time reading fiction, they drink and then they get hammered. But I mean, I think the week that your book arrived, your publisher was nice enough to send me a early copy. I think I had 4 or 5 other books arrived that week, and I started looking through yours and I started reading it, and next thing you know, it was like 12:30 at night. And it was just, I used to live in Jackson Hole where the book is based, and I was kind of in the world that the book is set in. And it was just, I mean, it's a wonderful page turner, fast, exciting, but there's some really deep lessons that I think about. And I think that this podcast is based on a lot of. So maybe we just start at the beginning. How you mentioned this briefly, but how did the story come to you? How did you get this seed in your mind?
So back in 2014, back in 2013, we moved back to Eau Claire, Wisconsin, where my wife and I are from, and we started construction of a house where I'm talking to you from. And when that house was complete, an old family friend of mine who works in the building trade stopped by to just kind of see it. And he started describing this house that he was working on not so very far away from us, multi-million-dollar house, which is a lot for our neck of the woods. Mm-hmm. And they slipped behind on their construction deadline. And the homeowner got everybody together on the crew and said she would offer each of them a 5-figure bonus if they could get the house finished in the next 3 weeks. And my buddy turns to me and he said, "Nick, if we had all the meth in the world, we couldn't have finished that house in 3 weeks." And I thought, holy shit, that seems like a pretty good idea for a book. So I began asking myself questions about, well, who is that homeowner? Uh-huh. And where did that money come from? And why does she have this intense deadline? And what if this crew, rather than declining that offer, what if they accepted it? And what if they slipped behind on that deadline and had to resort to something to stay up all night long to keep working on it? So I knew it was a good idea for a book, but I didn't know what the setting was. Yep. I just couldn't quite see it in Wisconsin, because even though we have brutal winters, it's not the same. Like, roads here don't just close down. It's not the same level, not the same depth of snow, I guess you could say. And then we took a family trip out to Yellowstone, and we came down through Jackson, and I was just super naive we came into Jackson, and I was like, oh, look at this quaint ski town. Like this, maybe if I didn't live in Eau Claire, maybe this would be a place to settle down. It seems great. Started looking at real estate listings and was like, sweet Jesus, who can live here? Yeah. I think that I honestly remember looking at listings, and I think the lowest listing was like $750,000 for just a shitty house.
Like a studio condo or something. Yeah.
Yeah, just nothing special. And then so we passed out of Jackson, and we went about 45 minutes south east of there to Hot Springs in the Bridger Teton National Forest, and we camped there for several days and had a wonderful time as a family, just walking to the springs every day. And I would sit in the springs and kind of look out at the creek below us and the mountains and the cliff faces, and I was like, this is it. Mm-hmm. What if this wasn't publicly owned land? What if somebody owned this privately? And then I knew what the setting was. And as your job as a writer is to try to up the ante of situations, and I was like, well, this isn't a $2 million house in Eau Claire, Wisconsin. This is a $15-20 million house in Jackson, Wyoming. Mm-hmm. And that's how we'll up the ante of class conflict and weather and all that stuff. So,
and is that process that you just described, is that similar to how your other books have come together? This just kind of an idea pops in and then little different pieces of info start kind of gathering around, and then all of a sudden it makes sense. Like how long generally does it take you to really dial in a story enough to know, and the themes involved to know, all right, there's a book here. This is versus just, oh, that seems like a good idea, and then it kind of fades out.
Good question. This is kind of the most plot forward book that I think I've ever written.
Okay.
My other books tend to sort of have more of like an emotional question at the center. Like my book, The Hearts of Men, which is primarily set at a Boy Scout camp in northern Wisconsin. I mean, that was just me trying to figure out who my dad was and what being a dad is for me, what being a man is for me, what does honor and mean, what does having a code of conduct mean. So with that book, I mean, I think I had read Lord of the Flies and was really influenced by that novel and began thinking about trying to write my own sort of 21st century version of something like that. With Shotgun Love Songs, I think the emotional question was loneliness and homesickness and music and writing. So I just kind of start with the feeling and begin working my way into the book. And then once I have that emotional tonality, I don't really know how to put it differently, then I start thinking about the plot and the characters.
Mm-hmm. And so obviously, Wisconsin is home, and you've got this deep connection to Wisconsin, the landscape, the people, the culture, but and this one's based in Jackson Hole, and as a former resident of Jackson Hole, although just for a few years, but I felt like you just nailed it in a lot of ways as far as the culture there, the challenges there. So, I mean, what was that process like? Because, I mean, you're figuring out the process of figuring out life in Jackson Hole for normal people who aren't billionaires. I mean, how did you go about doing that?
So right or wrong, I never thought of it as like a Jackson Hole story. I thought of it as an American story. This is happening everywhere.
You're right.
It's happening in Missoula. It's happening in Jackson. It's happening in Bayfield, Wisconsin. And I think if I had focused the book more in Jackson Hole, there would have been more pitfalls. There would have been more areas for me to make mistakes. But I knew that landscape outside pretty well. Like I'd camped it and hiked it. And so I think understanding that the emotional question of this book is sort of like this class conflict that we're experiencing now, and this greed and search for happiness or whatever, that was what was important to me. And I'm heartened to hear you say that. And I was heartened the other day to hear my friend John Larison, who's a Westerner, say, when he opened the book, he had his red pen ready for this Midwesterner to make mistakes, and he didn't really find any. So that was good. But I don't know. Does that make sense to you?
No, that makes, and I think you're exactly right. I mean, I haven't lived in Jackson Hole for, I don't know, 13, 14 years now. But most of my work now is in Colorado, and the same thing's happening everywhere. I mean, and it's happening. Like I ran into some guy recently, just bumped into him at somewhere. We were on vacation, and there's a guy who lived in Boulder, and he's one of these tech guys. And he was saying that he and his family, he's a very nice guy, but they had just bought a house in Leadville, Colorado, which when you think about the upper Arkansas Valley, Leadville is generally the least desirable. Leadville's at the top, Buena Vista, then Salida at the bottom. And Salida has been hot for a while, but this guy said that you could not buy a house in Leadville. There was none available. And it's because all these people from the Front Range, Boulder, and during the pandemic just started buying up houses there. And so you just wonder what that's doing to the locals there. Oh. And I mean, and that's Leadville. It's not even like, I mean, I love Leadville. I love that landscape. That was my first taste of Colorado up there. But it's the idea that tech people from the Front Range are coming in and scooping up the real estate. I don't know that I can't say that it's good or bad or anything, but it's definitely, I mean, it's bad for certain people, and it's interesting to see this happening. And I think you talk a lot about in your book about kind of you highlight the haves and the have-nots and how there's this gap between the people that keep the town running and then the people that show up and want to be entertained or recreate or chill out or whatever. Maybe that's a good, could you read the passage that we talked about on page 146? Sure. Because I think this paragraph, I mean, every one of your paragraphs is like a work of art, but I think this one really sums up a lot of the issues we talk about here on this podcast.
For the first time, he understood that this town did not want people like him and his family. As laborers, yes, but could they just please live as far out of sight as possible? Or better yet, strive for invisibility altogether? This town did not want rusted old minivans on driveways, plastic toys in the front yard, or loud music and smoky charcoal grills, true towny bars or mom-and-pop greasy spoons. No, everything was becoming polished and perfectly clean. The town wanted houses like this to be razed, torn down, and rebuilt 5 times larger. A few of his ranch hand friends never even came into town anymore. They'd come to hate the looks they got for chewing tobacco, smoking a Marlboro, or ordering a Bud Light. And yet he felt a growing wave of excitement at the notion of becoming a homeowner. All right, the place wasn't perfect, but Brittany was right. Bart and Cole would gladly help him out. And starting with the roof, they could work their way down, got the kitchen and bathrooms first, then finished the basement. Maybe the girls would even pitch in, help paint the house, have the opportunity to know the pride in improving something. Heck, in 10 years, maybe they could flip the house for double what they'd paid and start a new project, maybe even get some acreage outside of town.
Man, I just feel like that summarizes because, it summarizes life in these towns because, everybody there, the people that have the money are living comfortably. And then the people that are trying to earn a living by kind of offering services to these people, they're just struggling to do anything, to have their own place. And I don't even know the question to ask about this. But what do you think about it? I mean, what is your thought process when you reread that and think about everything that went into writing those paragraphs?
Well, let me answer that question with a story. So this winter, 2 friends of mine, married couple, had their house burned down. They live in rural Wisconsin. I could tell you where they live, but it doesn't matter. It is the middle of nowhere. They had a nice house, middle-class family. The insurance gave them a check when the house burned down. Mm-hmm. So they thought, well, we can move anywhere in the country we want to. And they're both into hunting. So husband went out to Missoula, looked at houses for 2 weeks, found one that was within their price range. And the realtor said, look, if you want this house, you're going to have to pay $76,000 over asking. I mean, if we're just going to be competitive. Mm-hmm. So this is a middle-class family, and that's a lot of money. They did it. They went $76,000 over asking. They weren't even in the top 3 bidders for that house. A month later, they're just trying to find now at this point, they're just trying to find any house to live in, like anywhere in Wisconsin, Minnesota, northern Michigan. They find one in Bayfield, Wisconsin, which is a really cool community up on Lake Superior. Probably one of the more desirable communities in the state of Wisconsin. They find a place within their price range, maybe even a little pricey. The realtor says you're going to have to pay $86,000 over asking. They don't get that house either because a private equity firm apparently snatched it up for more than that. And now they're in a place where, they're a middle-class family. They've got a nice check to be able to put into a place. They can't find anything. Mm-hmm. So then I'm thinking, well, if that's happening to my middle-class friends, what about the 40% or 30% of America who is literally scratching by paycheck to paycheck? Some kid gets a broken leg in their family, they're bankrupt.
Yep.
Or their car breaks down, they're bankrupt. I don't really even know what the answer is. I'm not purporting within this book to answer these questions. It's not healthy.
No.
You know what I mean?
Oh, I know exactly what you mean. And I was there. Speaking about Jackson Hole specifically, I was there 05, 06, 07, as the real estate market was going bananas, and then it crashed soon after I left. And, it was a similar thing. And that was, but I feel like in some ways it's kind of worse now. And I don't know, I don't know what the answer is. But I think people, writing books like this, it's such an entertaining book that if you didn't care one bit about Jackson Hole or any of these challenges that the working class are facing, you would still thoroughly enjoy this book. But it's almost like you sneak in these lessons to make people think about these issues. And I think that's step number one, is people just need to understand. And that's another question I have is, you're obviously passionate about this and it means something about these issues and it means something to you. But when you're writing a book, or when you were writing this book, how much of it is, I want to get these themes across to people versus I want to write a really action-packed book that's awesome? Or are they so interconnected you can't really separate them?
No, I try not to. I had a teacher at Iowa, Ethan Kanan, whose work I admire a lot. I don't want to butcher what he said, but the spirit of what he said was basically like, good books aren't really predicated on ideas. Good books are predicated on story and character.
Yeah.
And for me anyway, I agree with that. Mm-hmm. I want to create characters that people care about and then put those characters in interesting positions where people want to turn pages. Mm-hmm. And then I trust myself intellectually that the things that I'm concerned with or struggling with in my own life are going to sort of percolate up through the text. But I think it's a mistake to hammer on politics or ideas too much, because it just doesn't feel organic to me within a story, So you just got, in my estimation, a writer's got to be kind of careful about that.
No, and I think that's one of the major reasons I need to read more fiction is because I read a lot of history and just kind of really in some ways dry nonfiction because I want I just want info. Mm-hmm. And I feel like I've heard this since I was in ninth grade and it still hasn't quite sunk in, but that you can get deeper lessons from novels, very well written novels than you can get from any fiction or academic text. I mean, nonfiction or academic text. There are these themes that can be conveyed that there's these three guys, the three main characters in your story, they're not real, but there are so many people in the world that are like them and that are doing that are just chasing this thing for the sake of their family or for chasing demons out of their own lives. And there's just these universal truths that can be taken out of fiction. I know that's just like fiction 101, and but I'm still really not appreciating it until I read a book like yours, and then I'm like, golly.
I think it's a sort of a weakness in men, in a lot of men. I don't mean that like, I don't mean to.
No, I agree. I said that in our first email. Yeah. I said it's a weakness. Yeah. I've got a personal weakness.
But I think it's like, I can totally relate with what you're saying. It feels like we have a finite amount of time, and within that time, you want to be teaching or learning something. And the difference, I think, with novels is that you go on this emotional journey with imaginary people. And I think for a lot of guys, it's almost like bewildering or something. Like they start feeling emotions for the ink on the page, the imaginary people within these stories, and they don't know what's happening to them.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? But that empathy is so important, and that's a cliche amongst fiction writers, empathy. But, one thing I'm hoping about with this book is the three, male characters at the crux of it. They're not maybe politically popular characters at this point in America, but they're true to the landscape.
Yes.
These are guys that like I am not necessarily politically simpatico with. Maybe I'd have a good time drinking beer with them, but they still deserve to have their story told. I don't know.
No, I agree. And to see that they're while I probably wouldn't agree with their politics either, but once you get in their head and you see what they're struggling with, whether it's this pressure to provide for your family or the demons of addiction, like there's just all these, and then all of a sudden you feel empathy for them. And
right.
If you were to follow them on social media, for example, which is complete bullshit. You follow them on social media and then you would be like, I hate these guys. I don't want anything to do with these guys. But when all the complexities that are driving them, for me, right. It can give me empathy for the larger real world,
Yeah. And it's part of the conversation that's got to happen in these communities too. That you're starting to, do you just push out somebody who's different? It's gentrification. It's just happening in rural parts of America, So now it's not in a city. Now it's not rich white people pushing out poor brown people. Now it's rich white people pushing out poor white people.
Oh, you're right. I just read a book, it's written by Academic Press, University of Washington Press, and they publish awesome books, and I get a lot of them in the mail. And I just read one, and it's called Pushed Out, Rural Gentrification in the United States West. And it's a study, basically a case study of this town in Idaho that was a mill town and, or lumber town. And it busted. It was this booming town. It busted, and now it's the new tourist spot. And it's all the same themes you've talked about in your novel, and about and all the challenges that come with that. And very readable, despite being an academic book. It's a very readable book, and I'm kind of getting obsessed with all this, as you can probably tell, obsessed with all these themes. One more question about the way you wrote this book and getting in these characters' heads. And I'm not going to give anything away, but it's no secret that meth plays quite a role in this book. How did you learn how to write so clearly about meth?
Yeah, I did a lot of research.
What kind of research?
Mostly Google research, right?
Good.
My Google search history was pretty dirty for a while.
Oh man!
And I did talk to people that had used meth. And one fascinating thing about drugs, even, pharmaceuticals, is that drugs don't affect people in the same way. So we have this notion of what somebody who uses meth looks like, but that's not always true. You can be functional and use meth. So, and I talked to people about what their experiences were on meth. And then when I sat down at the desk to try to write those scenes, I would get my heart rate up and try to achieve that sort of feeling. I couldn't, of course. I wasn't, like I told you, I have a great life. I'm not going to just start using meth for a novel. But I think I got to a place where I could achieve it as best I could. And then I really wanted the reader to feel like in that moment, the roller coaster just fell off the side of the earth, and now you're on a rocket ship.
And how did you, what was your process for writing this book? Was it because the pace is so quick and it just keeps going. And did your style of writing this book differ from styles of other books you've written, or how did you, what was your process and timeline for cranking this thing out?
It was much different than my normal books. I basically put myself on a timeline pretty much like the guys in the book. There's writers that operate way faster than me that can probably write a book without too much torment in a matter of months. But I tend to take about 2 years or 18 months. But for this one, I put myself on I guess it was maybe a 5-month kind of calendar. And at that same time, I was promoting my last book, Little Faith. I think I visited about 50 bookstores and libraries and book festivals. And with 2 young kids, I was just writing every chance I could. When I was in line picking the kids up from school, I'd be sitting in the car with my laptop. I was doing that at their swim practice. If I was touring and I was in Dubuque, Iowa at some hotel, I was writing. And I just kind of tried to duplicate that, anxious high wire feeling that is hopefully in the book. And I don't know that I really care to do that again. When I was done with the book, I felt pretty exhausted and raw.
Mm-hmm. And so when you compare it to the 4 books before this one, when it takes you, between 18 months and 2 years, is that more of a sit down at the desk at the same time every day and write, or like what was the process up until Godspeed?
Well, candidly, I didn't really have a process probably up until about 2017. A part of it was just like, we're a young family. So you're always chasing kids around and their schedule doesn't necessarily cohere to my schedule. And I always had the attitude early on that I wasn't going to like shut my office door and be like, Daddy is unavailable. I didn't want my kids to hate writing or hate books. So I would try to write late at night or maybe while they were at school. And then around 2017, I actually found a process. I would drop the kids off at school. I'd go to a local cafe. I'd shoot the shit with my favorite barista for a while, talk about Willie Nelson or Waylon Jennings. And then I'd sit down and work for 4 hours or so. And then, COVID just blew all that to hell. That was just after Godspeed sold. So, the past 18 months, 2 years, I've been kind of trying to figure out what that process looks like again.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Are you working on anything now? Have you started working on the next one, or how does that kind of gap between novels work for you?
Yeah, I'm working on a new book and I'm excited about it. I've always got a couple irons in the fire, but I think pretty soon here I'm just going to focus on one book and I write some nonfiction for my local paper, which is sort of an interesting endeavor. I don't think the literati would think it was super sexy, but I write about every 3 weeks. I write a column for my local paper, which tends to be about the natural world or music or whatever I'm interested in.
What is that paper called?
The Eau Claire Leader Telegram.
All right, we're going to link to it.
Yeah. And that's been fun because, like I started to talk, or we were talking about purpose, and, I think of that endeavor as sort of about craft and meeting deadlines and expanding who I am as a writer to encompass like nonfiction work and, working with this small newspaper that might not be around that much longer, but trying to get readers to be excited about local journalism and local stories. And it's been hugely rewarding despite, I'm not getting rich off it. So, yeah.
One of the things that stuck out to me when we were initially introduced was the variety of jobs that you had before you were able to focus on writing full time. And it sounds like, you've done it all, and you've worked. Since you were a kid, you've been working hard. But like when you think about all the different jobs you've had, what's the craziest one you've ever had, or the most impactful? Like one that you're like, man, I'm a different person, or I'm a better person for having done that, even if it wasn't all that great at the time.
Well, I worked at the Oscar Mayer meatpacking plant in Madison, Wisconsin, which is not open anymore. But and I didn't work there for long. I don't want to like oversell it, but I worked there for 8 months. My shift would start at, I think, about 4:15 in the morning, and I graduated college in 2002, which was a pretty low point in American economics.
Yep.
And couldn't really find a job. And Madison's a hard place to find a job too. There's people with PhDs in astrophysics driving cabs and stuff like that. And so I just took the job, and man, people were so nice to me. Like they would tease me all the time. Like, aren't you glad you got that college degree? You're working here with us. And it was immigrants and middle-class folks, and it was hard work, and it was dangerous work and kind of scary. I remember the first day I walked into the factory, and it just smelled like meat spice, and there was blood on the floor, and it was cold. And I remember, you can't make this stuff up, a big black guy walked by me in the hallway, and he said, "Welcome to the plantation."
Damn.
Yeah. But I just, I think more than anything, I just really respect my coworkers from that time for being kind to me. They knew I wasn't going to be there forever, and they could have treated me like shit, but they did not. I have really fond, it was difficult, but I have fond memories of them. And I worked as a coffee roaster, which was kind of a sexy job, actually. It was physically difficult because I was roasting like thousands of pounds of coffee every day next to a superheated machine in a shitty industrial building on the edge of Madison. But once a year, I'd go down to Central America and source coffee and ride horses through the mountains. And that was just such a sensual job. So amazing. I got to see parts of the world that just normal people, even with means, don't get to see.
Where were you in Central America?
I was in El Salvador. I was in Panama, and I was in Costa Rica.
We, my wife and I lived in Costa Rica for a year and got to go on some of those coffee plantations. My wife actually did some research in grad school for a coffee plantation in Nicaragua. So she has the same things to say about it. And it's just like this different world that most gringos off the street don't get to experience. So, that's awesome, man. And I mean, and so when you're doing these jobs at the meatpacking plant or roasting coffee or traveling, writing is still are you like, I'm going to be a writer. I'm going to be a writer. Was that always kind of the driving force in the back of your mind, or I started asking like 10 questions in a row.
No, it's cool. I'm happy to talk about it. When I was, I think 28, my wife was pregnant with our first kid, and I was working at Star Liquor store in Madison, and we were on state benefits. And we were close. That 2008 was as a guy formerly working in real estate, it was a shitty time.
Yeah.
We almost lost our house, almost went bankrupt, and all that time leading up to then, I'd been sort of writing always in the background, but not super intensely. I hadn't committed myself to anything. And when I was working at that liquor store, and especially after hearing that we were pregnant, I had a conversation with myself, and I just said, like, what kind of dad do you want to be? What kind of man do you want to be? And what are you good at? And the only thing I could figure that I was any good at was writing. So I started taking workshops and really focusing on the writing. And I applied to grad schools one year, and I got shut out of every place I applied. And I applied the next year, and then I got into Iowa. And from there on, my path was, it wasn't easy, but it was much more clear. But for some reason in my life, it's kind of important to hit bottom from time to time. Mm-hmm. And I think I hit bottom working at that liquor store. I mean, I remember one morning, 9 a.m., we just opened the store, and a regular customer came in. He grabbed the shittiest bottle of rot gut whiskey that he could find, and then he put a pocket full of change into my hand to pay for it, and the change was just covered in broken glass and cocaine. God. And I thought, like, I don't think I can keep doing this for very long. This isn't what I want. There's nothing wrong with working in a liquor store. Liquor stores are some of my happiest places, but I can't keep doing this, and I don't want to be doing this when I bring a baby into the world. And then I just started focusing,
I mean, I had a similar type experience. Just kind of when I look back, I'm like, all right, that was a point of an inflection point in my life. There's several that I can think of. And one, was having, when my wife was pregnant with our first daughter. But it's real easy to look back and tell when you're telling the story in 3 or 4 minutes to say, and then at this point, everything changed. Like I had a really bad health scare during grad school when I wanted to be a real estate developer, and I was in Washington D.C. working at this fancy real estate development company and got the shit scared out of me with a medical thing. And then, so when I'm telling that story and looking back, I'm like, that was a turning point. But there was so much hard work to change the trajectory between then and now. And so I mean, like what did you start doing different? Like on a daily basis? I mean, did you commit to writing a certain amount every day, or was it just a shift in your attitude? Or, I mean, what was the trajectory from that time when that guy handed you all that shit, the cocaine and stuff?
Well, it was a change in attitude for sure, a change in focus, and a change in practice too. I mean, I would get home from the liquor store and 10 o'clock at night and write until I couldn't really write anymore. At that time, it was short stories. Mm-hmm. And I would send those short stories out, to literary journals and magazines. And, I always tell people, like, if you want to be a writer, you need to be prepared for a 99% rejection tally, because it is brutal. But, some of those things started happening for me. And then when I got into Iowa, my wife, as I told you, was trained as an attorney. And even though she graduated like in the top, I can never remember, I think the top 1% of her class, even though she graduated at the top of her class, when we came to Iowa City, no firms there would hire her because they knew we were sort of like short timers. We were there primarily for my program. Mm-hmm. So she got a job in Minneapolis and we moved there. And then I would drive down to Iowa City every Monday night and drive back every Wednesday or Thursday. That's a 4.5 hour drive.
Damn.
And that was so important, Ed, because it was like we were both sacrificing something. Mm-hmm. Like she was becoming a single parent 4 days a week with a new kid, working, a tough job. And I knew that if I didn't have something at the end of those 2 years, like what were we doing? And I tallied up all those hours in the car driving down there, and it ended up being 31 days of my life.
Damn.
Just driving down I-35 through some pretty boring country, let's face it. And so I was just intense, man. I knew what I wanted, and I saw what the competition looked like, because it's so full of top-notch writers, mm-hmm. many of whom I admire and think are brighter than me, but I didn't want to be outworked. That might be a cliche, but I think even my classmates would tell you, like, I was busting my ass. Yeah.
And how do you keep that fire going? I mean, you're obviously, you've experienced a great deal of success. I mean, especially the story you told at the beginning about how everything launched off when you sold your first one. But yeah. I mean, I would think it could be even focused, tough people could start coasting a little bit. And so what do you do? Is there anything specifically you do? I mean, I know it seems like me and you are pretty similar, and all I have to do is look at my little girls, and then that gets me fired up. But like, what do you do to keep that work ethic, and I don't know if you call it competitiveness or whatever, but like keep that fire going?
Well, I am competitive, so I have some tricks, some that I won't share, but I have things that get me fired up, and part of it is just, I don't know and people don't always believe me when I say this, but like, what am I going to do now? Like, I'm not really marketable anymore. Mm-hmm. I've been playing with imaginary people inside my head for 10 years. Okay. I don't have a boss. I haven't had a boss in 10 years. I mean, my resume looks crazy. It's like there's a giant blank over the last 10 years. And then prior to that, my last job was working at a liquor store. Mm-hmm. So I'm kind of terrified. I don't want to go back to what I did before, but I also sort of feel like, what else am I going to do? Yeah. So I just keep going. I mean, that propels me. And it's not like I expect that everything is going to be the way that it was when I started off, but now at this point, it's like, okay, well, I'm a craftsman. I'm going to keep working on my craft. I'm going to keep trying to tell interesting stories and keep going, and hopefully keep building a readership that sticks with me, and then see where we are, at the end of the day.
Obviously, work ethic is important to you. It's very, very important to me for a lot of reasons. I mean, I think one for me is it's respect. It's respect for the people like my parents, my grandparents, all these people that have come before me that have given me, and the only reason they were working, they wanted their children and all their heirs to have a good life at some point. And so for me, the work ethic thing is just a matter of having respect for people who work very hard before me. And that's one of the things I want to instill in my girls is a work ethic, not crazy, not workaholic, not, not like the lady, Gretchen, I believe in the novel. I don't want them to work like that, but I want them to have a respect for trying and for being serious about and respectful about giving things a good effort. So how do you, other than obviously setting a good example, how do you instill that in your kids, or try to instill it in your kids?
Well, it's funny. I mean, I might not even be the best example in their lives. I mean, I think their mom is a better example. Mm-hmm. And one thing that amazes me about my wife is she's the kind of person that people they come to her with their problems. And there's no way to I don't know how to explain it, except the phone rings at 7:00 or 7:30 at night, and it's somebody who's maybe going to go through a divorce or whose parent just had a stroke, and they need somebody to talk to, and it's my wife. Yep. And, I'm so lucky. I mean, I have this job that allows me to basically, wake up, drink my coffee, get into my sweatpants, spend time with these imaginary characters, pick up the kids from school, do stuff like that. But I don't have the same grind that she does. And so I just I think my role in our family is showing our children that if you have a dream when you're a child or a teenager, that you can live your dream if you work hard enough. Mm-hmm. A lot of people want to become writers or authors, but they don't understand, and this has crystallized in my mind more and more recently, that they're in competition with me. Mm-hmm. They're in competition with Rick Bass. They're in competition with Stephen King and Marilyn Robinson. And you can't just throw up a shitty book and expect that you're going to have a life writing books. It is cutthroat and it's difficult. And yeah, I think mostly for me, it's just showing the kids that if you have a dream, you can do it. You just gotta work for it too.
Mm-hmm. And when I hear, I think some people would hear that and they'd be kind of disheartened or whatever. But when I hear that and I think about, any creative little projects I'm working on, I love it. That when I hear that, it gives me energy, and maybe that says something about maybe I'm too competitive, or I don't know. I mean, that's probably too much testosterone or something, but I love hearing that. As you were saying that, I was gritting my teeth.
We both had too much coffee already this morning.
Oh, I know. And it sounds like we're very similar in that we both married up. My dad said that when I married Kim, it improved the Roberson family gene pool by magnitude. So I think we're in the same boat there.
No doubt.
Kind of a few more questions for you. Who are your literary influences? I mean, you've named a bunch, and you named some mentors and teachers. But if you had to give a handful of writers that you really admire, either their work or the way they work, who comes to mind?
Yeah, I mean, that's pretty Jim Harrison. When I discovered his work in my early 20s, it meant so much because he was a guy from northern Michigan who'd spent a lot of time in the UP and even in my neck of the woods here in Wisconsin. And he would, when you see a familiar place name in a book, it means it's like validation that you exist. Mm-hmm. And so I would see these place names of shitty little towns in the UP and be like, I've been there. Yeah. I spent time there. And the fact that this guy was living such an interesting life and producing, timeless, interesting, personal material from a part of the world that doesn't get a lot of attention was really edifying to me, because I had no interest I don't have any interest in living somewhere other than where I live. Rick Bass. I wrote Rick Bass a number of super intense fan letters in my early 20s, and been fortunate to spend some time with him, now that I'm a published guy. But I remember I once got a letter from him written on the back of a manuscript, and it was like, Nick, working hard on the next book, trying to save the yak, hope you are well, keep writing. And I thought, I thought, son of a bitch, I've taken him away from his work. All I wanted to do was like be seen by Rick Bass, and instead I've taken him away from his work. And but he was important to me, of course, too. Annie Proulx, Tom McGowan. I bet we probably have pretty similar heroes in fiction. For me, it's always about people that are sort of outliers.
Sure.
People that live in parts of the country that don't get a lot of attention, who are doing interesting things. And
you mentioned Annie. Is it Proulx? Is that how you pronounce it? Annie Proulx?
I think so. I could be wrong. I don't know. That's how I pronounce it.
We'll pronounce it like that. I'm from North Carolina. I can mispronounce things. Nobody give me a hard time. But they, my old business school professor, I went to grad school, got an MBA, and kind of my mentor there, he's a PhD in forensic accounting. But he's like the coolest guy. We rarely talk about business and definitely don't talk about accounting. But I just got a care package from him the other day with like 5 Annie Proulx books. So I got I've only read the shipping news. And I haven't read any of the other stuff. So I need to, I'm excited for that. When you think about the West and, either literature or just general books about the West, are there any that come to mind that are kind of your favorites?
There's a lot. I mean, thinking of Annie Proulx, I think of Brokeback Mountain right off the bat.
Yep.
My God, what a beautiful, I guess it's probably considered a novella or maybe a short story. Legends of the Fall, Treasure of the Sierra Madre. Ken Kesey's Sometimes a Great Notion, takes place in Oregon, of course. I love the work that, friends of mine are doing, guys like John Larison, guys like Chris Dombrowski, CJ Box, who else? David James Duncan. I think about an essay of his. I don't know if you've read it. It's one of the most haunting essays I've ever read about catching one of the few salmon that had come upstream in a given year. He'd accidentally caught one of 3 salmon that made it into a certain watershed, and this terrible sorrow that he felt, he felt triumphant in one moment that he caught the fish, and then later learned what a bad year it had been.
Yeah.
He's a fantastic writer. I'm going to forget people. It's one of those traps. There's too many great books.
Yeah. And I found personally, when I can read a book at some point and maybe don't connect, and then I go back and reread it or revisit it at 10 years later at a different point, and I connect so deeply on it. So it's kind of this weird thing or I could read one that I connected very deeply with 15 years ago, and now it doesn't mean as much, which I think is so interesting. Final question. The people that listen to this podcast, they just love the American West and all its complexity, and whether that's people who write, living through people like you who write about the West, or conservationists or athletes, just this wide spectrum. And I always like to ask people, do you have any kind of parting words of wisdom for the folks listening? And, it could be advice for aspiring writers, or just just overall advice. Anything come to mind?
I think for me, more and more, I just think about writing as my job and my craft. And I think if I can remember to do that, then I don't get distracted by all the bullshit. Mm-hmm. I don't have to worry about how my book is selling or not selling. I don't have to worry about how many Instagram followers I have or don't have. I just lock into my work, and it doesn't really matter what your work is. If your work is splitting wood, there's something so satisfying about being caught up in just making a pile of wood, or if you're in the service industry, doing good work for your clients, doing good work for the people that you serve food for, whatever it is. And I think we forget that there's all these distractions out there, all these glitzy, beautiful distractions, but really if you can focus on your work And if you can focus on serving other people somehow, everything else clicks into place. You know, it's sort of like, don't try too hard about the other stuff. Just try to do what you can control and what you're good at.
I love that. And I need that. Like that I always say that this podcast is very selfish because I want to know these answers, and I'm glad other people enjoy listening. But, that was, I love hearing that. So anyway, man, I really appreciate all your hard work in writing. I appreciate you sending me the book, and I can't wait to read all the rest of your work. And I appreciate you taking the time out of your schedule to join me, because I know this is a busy week for you, but, I'll look forward to more conversations in the future.
Hey, Ed, I hope so too, man. I'd love nothing more than to find a way to float down a river with you and Chris, or to walk through some field and look for some pheasants, whatever it is, or maybe just sit around a campfire and drink beer. That would make my day.
Hey, it's Ed again. Thanks so much for listening to the podcast. I know your time is valuable, so it means the world that you spend it listening. If you want to support the podcast and help it to continue to spread and grow, there are a few ways you can help. Number one, pass it along to a friend or share it on social media. Word of mouth recommendations are the most powerful way for ideas to spread, so I'd love it if you could share the podcast with a few pals who might enjoy it. Number two, you can go to Apple Podcasts and give it a 5-star review. Good reviews encourage the Apple overlords to suggest the podcast to others. So there's a link in the notes if you'd be so kind as to give it 5 stars. Number three, you can support the podcast financially via Patreon, and there are exclusive benefits for those who do, including a monthly behind-the-scenes newsletter, Mountain and Prairie stickers, live and recorded video chats with podcast guests, and much more. Number four, I've also got 2 emails that I send out. The first is my weekly email called Good News from the American West, which I send out every Wednesday. It's only positive news, something we can all use a little more of these days. And my other email is my bi-monthly book recommendations email. One email every other month with 5, 6, 7, or 8 books that I've recently read and highly recommend. The thousands of people on both of these lists will vouch for me. No spam or other funny business. And number 5, finally, check out my online store for Mountain and Prairie stickers, shirts, and coffee mugs. I've got some really cool designs from Western artists, with more on the way. So head to mountainandprairie.com/shop to check it all out. I'd love to connect with you. I'm on Instagram and LinkedIn, so look me up on either of those platforms by my name or through the links on my website. All right, that's it. Thanks so much for your support.